This is Dr. Paul Thomlinson from Compass Health Network, and I'm doing a continuing series on what we can learn from evidence-based science to help us deal with the COVID-19 crisis with grace and humanity. This one's called Learning Optimism, the 3 P words more powerful than pandemic. Compass is all about inspiring hope and promoting wellness, and that's what I aim to do here. I can't think of a time when we humans have needed optimism more than right now, when the world seems off its axis somehow, when uncertainties are everywhere, when creeping depression or overwhelming anxiety seem to threaten so many of us. I just saw a new poll that indicates about half of the people in the U.S. feel the coronavirus pandemic crisis is harming their mental health, and how the crisis has created a nationwide psychological trauma. In the face of such circumstances, there are powerful tools from evidence-based psychology to help us discipline our minds to create different, more helpful, more empowering mindsets about our challenges, about what's going on in the world. We all know the old saying about optimists and pessimists. They're glass half full and glass half empty people, right? And there are many jokes to illustrate the differences, like when the pessimist says, "Everything is terrible, it can't get any worse," to which the optimist replies, "Oh, yes, it can." Okay, that may be a misunderstanding of optimism, but you get the point. While there may be certain set points for optimism and pessimism, the good news is that once we understand the anatomy of optimism, we can work on changing our mindset and working through depression, anxiety, and the emotional paralysis that they can bring. We can learn to be more optimistic. By the way, this is all based on the groundbreaking and incredibly important work of Dr. Marty Seligman, who is one of my intellectual heroes and widely viewed as the founder of the positive psychology movement in science. His work has clearly demonstrated what optimism and pessimism really are psychologically, and more importantly, how we can learn to be more optimistic. Well, before we break down the anatomy of optimism, let's take a quick look at why this is important to our mental health and our ability to live a life of meaning and purpose. The bottom line is this: if we're pessimistic about the future, about our ability to deal, then we're more likely to do little or nothing about changing that which is in our control. On the other hand, if we're optimistic, it's clear that we are much more likely to work at solving problems, to work at finding solutions, and not be deterred by the big, scary psychological boogeyman that wants us to sit down and suffer. Pessimism deactivates us psychologically, while optimism activates us and energizes us. And again, if you don't have much optimism, stay tuned. It can be yours. I mentioned that there is an anatomy of optimism. What does that mean? It all comes down to what Marty Seligman has called our explanatory styles, or how we explain what's happening in our world. This is super important for us to understand. The way we humans are wired, we have to explain everything to ourselves. Why did this thing, XYZ thing, happen? And why did it happen to me? When we explain things to ourselves, we do so with a characteristic explanatory style that tends to be pessimistic or relatively more optimistic. In this model, it comes down to what we call the 3 Ps: permanence, pervasiveness, and personalization. So let's take a look at each of those right quick. Each of the Ps is part of how you explain what's happening to you, whether good or bad, whether it's a promotion at work or a flat tire when you get out to the parking lot, whether it's winning an award at school or contracting a nasty virus. We are driven to explain why these things happen to us, the causes for such things. And when we look at the explanations, they all have the 3 Ps embedded within them. Again, remember, permanence, pervasiveness, and personalization. Let's take a look at each of them in turn. Permanence is just that. Whatever happened to us is not going to change. It is with us forever. You can see how believing or telling ourselves that pandemic conditions will go on forever would be a very pessimistic explanation, and that it would be psychologically debilitating to some extent. The optimistic explanatory style is the opposite of that. It says this challenge, this set of circumstances, is temporary, impermanent, and will change. We know that this too shall pass, and we need to consciously remind ourselves of that in order to grow our optimism. The pandemic is not permanent. Pervasiveness is the idea that whatever the challenge is, it will permeate and pervade and bleed over into every part of life. So if we see the current challenge, the enemy of COVID-19, as pervading all of our lives, that's the pessimistic explanation. The optimistic mindset says no, even a global pandemic that disrupts so many aspects of our lives cannot pervade into the areas that really matter. It doesn't take away your strength and your resilience. It doesn't take away your ability to love. It may even enhance it. And it doesn't take away your ability to do good work, even if work is different than it was before in many ways. The pandemic may feel pervasive, but it is not, and it does not have to feel like it. The final P is personalization, when we take things personally. Well, more than that, when we feel as though bad things happen to us because of a personal reason, like there's something flawed in us that brings on bad things. We can come to feel like we deserve them. When relationships fail, or when our car craps out on us, or when we're hit with unexpected bills, when we lose a job, or when our world is swept with a dangerous and deadly viral pandemic. How do you explain negative events to yourself? The pessimist says, it's personal. It's because there's something wrong with me, or I did something deserving of punishment, or the like. The optimistic response is to say to ourselves, this is not my fault. It's not because I'm a bad person. It's not because I'm cursed, as I've actually heard people say. Or at least, not all my fault. A little point here is in order. This isn't about denying personal responsibility for creating a mess in your relationships or losing a job because you were slacking off and not performing well. It's not about escaping personal responsibility for those things that are in your control. It's healthy to accept personal responsibility for those things, but not when it's truly out of your personal control, which so many things are. Okay, so the 3 Ps we've talked about a bit. Now let's take a look at how they work in an example of something good and then something bad. Imagine something good happens at work. You landed a new big account or got a promotion or got a great performance review or whatever is good in your world of work. Now the question is, how do you explain that to yourself? Because you will. You'll explain it somehow. Through the lens of the 3 Ps, if you're a pessimist, you think your good fortune won't last. Low permanence. It doesn't affect or apply to the rest of your life. Low pervasiveness. And it's because you got lucky somehow. That's low personalization. It wasn't because you're good at your job or whatever. It's because you got lucky or some other external explanation. That's how a pessimist explains something good. Now, if you're an optimist, you'll see things the other way around. Good things in your life do endure. High permanence. It's another example of the many blessings in your life. High pervasiveness. And it's probably the result of all the diligent, patient, persistent, hard work that you've put in for quite some time now. High personalization. It's because of something you do, something you have control over. That's a very different explanation for something good. Okay? That's powerful stuff, explanatory style. But now let's look at the negative event. This is actually kind of more interesting in a way, based on where we are now in the world. Let's say you get laid off because of the pandemic, or lose a big client at work, whatever, some negative event. How do you explain that to yourself? How do you think the pessimist is going to explain that? The pessimist, remember, is convinced that anything positive won't last. They think this negative thing will go on forever. I'll never get another job. I'll never get over this setback. And that, by the way, can spiral out of control very quickly. And I'll die homeless and penniless, and nobody loves me. High permanence is a very bad thing with terrible events, feeling like it's never going to go away, because they do. The next P is pervasiveness, and although the positive event wasn't pervasive for the pessimist, the negative event is. Losing your job will spill over into all areas of life and destroy your relationships, cause you to give up on your other passions or avocations or hobbies or whatever. The third P is personal, and although the pessimist wouldn't take any credit for the positive event, the negative event is totally your fault as a pessimist. I've been amazed to hear people who have somehow personalized the pandemic. This is just my luck. I must have made God mad at me, and here I am. Those kinds of things. Let's look now at how the optimist looks at the negative events. Here's where we really want to get to right now. Learning how to be optimists in the face of a universally recognized negative set of circumstances, like the pandemic. It's very different for the optimist, and very different in its impact on behavior. It's empowering and energizing instead of draining and defeating. The optimist knows and believes the layoff is just a temporary setback, and they'll be working again. That's low permanence. The optimist knows that the job, though important, is just one part of a life that has many other good things in it. That's low pervasiveness for the negative event. And the layoff is at least partly due to a disruption in the economy because of the pandemic, etc. So there's no need to take it personally. The pandemic is not permanent. The pandemic is not pervasive if you don't let it be. And the pandemic is not personal. Check yourself in all these areas, because explanatory styles are powerful stuff. and they're good medicine for a depressed or anxious soul. Check in on your good and bad stuff, the good and bad stuff in your life. How do you interpret them differently? Do you tend to have an optimistic or pessimistic explanatory style? The good news is that mastering our explanatory styles, like anything else, takes practice. It takes recognizing it, which we've talked about, and it takes practicing to change it. So next time you feel yourself getting swept away by negative events or not fully appreciating the positive ones that you still have in your life, check your P's.